The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked purposefully through the grand corridors. Her heels clicked against the polished stone with determined precision, each step echoing the resolve that had been building within her for months. Today was different from any other day in the royal calendar. Today, everything would change. Catherine had spent sleepless nights poring over ancient royal protocols, dusty legal documents, and forgotten ceremonial rules that dated back centuries. What she discovered buried deep within the royal archives would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Hidden in plain sight was a clause that had never been invoked, a rule so obscure that even the palace historians had overlooked its significance. The state drawing room buzzed with nervous energy as senior members of the royal household gathered for what they believed would be a routine ceremonial meeting. Camilla, Queen Consort, sat regally in her appointed chair, the crown of Queen Mary resting on a velvet cushion beside her. She wore a satisfied smile, completely unaware that her position was about to be challenged in the most dramatic way possible. Catherine entered the room with an air of quiet confidence that immediately caught everyone's attention. She carried with her a leather-bound folder containing documents that would turn the royal hierarchy upside down. Her research had revealed that, according to the ancient laws of precedence established during the reign of Edward III, a Princess of Wales who bore the direct heir to the throne held certain ceremonial rights that superseded those of a queen consort in specific circumstances. The room fell silent as Catherine approached the high table where the royal advisers sat. Lord Chancellor Harrison, a man who had served the crown for over 3 decades, looked up with curiosity as Catherine placed her folder before him. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he opened the documents, his eyes widening with each page he turned. Camilla watched the exchange with growing unease. She had noticed Catherine's unusual behavior over the past few weeks, the way she had been spending hours in the royal library, the hushed conversations with constitutional experts, the determined look in her eyes during family gatherings. Something was brewing, and Camilla could feel it in the air like an approaching storm. The tension in the room became palpable as Lord Chancellor Harrison cleared his throat. His voice carried the weight of authority as he addressed the assembled group, explaining that Catherine had uncovered a legal precedent that had profound implications for the current ceremonial order. The ancient law stated that during the transition period following a monarch's death, the Princess of Wales, who had given birth to the heir apparent, held the right to assume certain royal privileges traditionally reserved for the queen consort. Catherine's heart pounded as she listened to the formal reading of the statute. She had discovered that this obscure rule applied specifically to situations where the new king had not yet been formally crowned, creating a unique window of opportunity. King Charles had ascended to the throne upon Queen Elizabeth's passing, but his coronation had been delayed due to various political complications, leaving the monarchy in this unprecedented transition period. Camilla's face drained of color as the full implications of Catherine's discovery became clear. The young princess had not only found a legal loophole, but had also gathered the support of several influential members of Parliament who believed that the monarchy needed fresh blood to remain relevant in modern times. Catherine had been quietly building a coalition of support, using her popularity with the British public and her role as the mother of the future king to strengthen her position. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as Catherine stepped forward to address the assembly. Her voice was steady and clear as she explained her intentions. She was not seeking to overthrow the established order, but rather to invoke her ancient rights during this unique period in royal history. She argued that the monarchy needed to demonstrate its ability to adapt and evolve, and her assumption of certain ceremonial duties would signal a new era of royal leadership. Sir Edmund Rothwell, the palace's chief constitutional advisor, found himself in an unprecedented situation. Never in his 40-year career had he encountered such a complex legal challenge to the established royal order. The documents Catherine presented were authentic, the precedents were valid, and the timing created a perfect storm of circumstances that made her claim legally sound. Camilla finally found her voice, her words sharp with indignation and disbelief. She accused Catherine of orchestrating an elaborate scheme to undermine her position and questioned the younger woman's motives. The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, transforming what had begun as a legal discussion into a personal confrontation between two of the most powerful women in Britain. Catherine remained composed despite Camilla's emotional outburst. She calmly explained that her actions were motivated by her duty to the crown and her belief that the monarchy needed to embrace change to survive. She pointed out that the British public had shown overwhelming support for her family and that her assumption of enhanced ceremonial roles would be welcomed by the people. The legal team scrambled to verify Catherine's claims, making frantic phone calls to constitutional experts and historical scholars. As the hours passed, it became increasingly clear that Catherine had done her homework thoroughly. Every document was authenticated, every precedent was verified, and every legal argument was sound. News of the confrontation began to leak beyond the palace walls as staff members whispered about the extraordinary events unfolding in the state drawing room. Social media buzzed with speculation as royal watchers noticed the unusual number of official cars arriving at the palace and the extended length of what should have been a routine meeting. The implications of Catherine's move extended far beyond ceremonial precedents. If successful, her action would establish her as the most powerful woman in the royal family, effectively sidelining Camilla and positioning Catherine as the true queen in waiting. The move was bold, calculated, and potentially devastating to the existing power structure. As the day wore on, it became clear that Catherine had struck at exactly the right moment. The palace was caught completely off guard, unprepared for such a sophisticated constitutional challenge. The young princess had turned her reputation for being dutiful and compliant on its head, revealing herself to be a master strategist capable of outmaneuvering even the most experienced palace insiders. The crown of Queen Mary sat on its velvet cushion, now the symbol of a brewing constitutional crisis rather than a simple ceremonial artifact. Both women's eyes kept returning to it throughout the day, each understanding that whoever ultimately wore it would hold unprecedented power within the royal family. Camilla's supporters rallied around her, arguing that Catherine's interpretation of the ancient law was overly broad and that such precedents had been rendered obsolete by centuries of constitutional evolution. They insisted that the queen consort's position was secure and that Catherine's challenge was nothing more than an ambitious power grab disguised as constitutional scholarship. However, Catherine's faction countered with polling data showing that the British public overwhelmingly supported her family and believed that she represented the future of the monarchy. They argued that Camilla, as someone who had entered the royal family through remarriage rather than birth or original marriage to the heir, lacked the deep connection to the crown that Catherine possessed through her children. The standoff continued through the afternoon as both sides prepared for what was becoming clear would be a prolonged battle. Catherine had opened a constitutional Pandora's box that could not easily be closed, and the reverberations of her bold move were beginning to be felt throughout the highest levels of British government. Palace staff found themselves choosing sides as the crisis deepened, with some supporting Catherine's vision of a modernized monarchy and others defending the traditional order that Camilla represented. The very foundations of royal protocol were being challenged, and nobody knew what the ultimate outcome would be. As evening approached, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a struggle that would determine the future direction of the British monarchy. Catherine had succeeded in her first objective. She had created a crisis that demanded resolution, and in doing so, she had positioned herself at the center of the most significant royal controversy in decades. The palace buzzed with nervous energy as staff members prepared for what many believed would be a sleepless night of negotiations, legal consultations, and political maneuvering. The battle for the crown had begun, and the entire royal establishment would be forced to choose sides in a conflict that would reshape the monarchy forever. The emergency session convened at midnight in the palace's most secure conference room, far from the prying eyes of curious staff members and potential media infiltrators. Catherine sat across from Camilla at the polished mahogany table, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of crystal chandeliers that had witnessed countless royal crises throughout the centuries. The tension between the two women was so thick it seemed to permeate the very air they breathed. King Charles paced nervously behind his chair, his usually composed demeanor shattered by the constitutional nightmare that his daughter-in-law had unleashed. He had been pulled away from a state dinner with foreign dignitaries, his evening dress still bearing the medals and decorations of his royal office. The irony was not lost on anyone present that his own ceremonial regalia now seemed to mock the chaos that threatened to tear his family apart. Princess Anne sat stoically in the corner, her sharp eyes moving between Catherine and Camilla like a spectator at a tennis match. Known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties, she had remained conspicuously silent throughout the initial confrontation, but her presence added weight to the proceedings. Everyone in the room knew that her eventual support would be crucial to resolving the crisis. The Archbishop of Canterbury arrived just after midnight, his robes hastily thrown over casual clothing, his face grave with the understanding that he was about to be thrust into the most significant royal constitutional crisis since the abdication of Edward VIII. As the head of the Church of England, his opinion on matters of royal precedence carried immense weight, and both factions understood that his endorsement could tip the balance decisively. Catherine's legal team had grown throughout the evening as constitutional experts, historians, and parliamentary scholars rallied to examine her claims. Professor Margaret Whitfield, Cambridge's leading authority on medieval royal law, had driven through the night from her countryside home, bringing with her additional documents that supported Catherine's interpretation of the ancient statutes. The documents spread across the table told a story that few had ever bothered to explore. Hidden within centuries of royal tradition lay a complex web of laws and precedents that had never been formally repealed, creating a parallel structure of authority that existed alongside the modern constitutional monarchy. Catherine had not just stumbled upon these rules. She had methodically researched them for months, understanding their implications long before she chose to act. Camilla's defense team, led by Sir Reginald Blackwood, the Crown's most senior legal counsel, argued passionately that the ancient laws Catherine cited had been rendered obsolete by the evolution of constitutional monarchy. They contended that centuries of precedent had established the Queen Consort's position as unassailable, and that Catherine's interpretation represented a dangerous departure from established royal protocol. The debate raged through the early hours of the morning as both sides presented their arguments with increasing intensity. Catherine maintained her composure throughout, occasionally consulting with her advisors, but never wavering from her central position that she was simply claiming rights that had always belonged to her under ancient law. Her calm confidence in the face of fierce opposition only seemed to strengthen her position. Prince William arrived at 3 in the morning, having been summoned from a charitable engagement in Scotland. His entrance into the room changed the dynamic entirely, as he represented both the immediate heir to the throne and Catherine's husband, placing him in an impossible position between family loyalty and constitutional duty. His face showed the strain of the journey and the weight of the decision he would be forced to make. The media began to catch wind of the crisis as palace staff members, despite strict confidentiality agreements, struggled to contain their excitement and concern. Rumors spread through London's royal watching community like wildfire, with social media buzzing with speculation about the unusual nighttime activity at Buckingham Palace. News vans began appearing outside the palace gates as dawn approached. Catherine's masterstroke came at 4 in the morning when she revealed that she had already gained preliminary support from key members of Parliament, including the Speaker of the House of Commons. She had been building her coalition in secret for weeks, meeting with influential political figures who had become increasingly concerned about the monarchy's future relevance and public support. The political implications of Catherine's move became clearer as the night wore on. Public opinion polls consistently showed that Catherine and William were the most popular members of the royal family, with approval ratings that far exceeded those of other senior royals. Catherine's claim to enhanced ceremonial authority aligned with public sentiment that saw her as representing the future of the monarchy. Camilla's supporters fought back by emphasizing the importance of tradition and stability in royal institutions. They argued that Catherine's actions, while perhaps technically legal, represented a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the entire constitutional structure of the monarchy. They warned that such dramatic changes could provoke a Republican backlash that would threaten the crown itself. The international implications began to dawn on the assembled group as morning approached. The British monarchy served as the head of state for numerous Commonwealth nations, and any constitutional crisis in London would send shockwaves throughout the global British sphere of influence. Catherine's bold move was not just a domestic royal matter, it was a potential international incident with far-reaching consequences. Archbishop Welby found himself in the uniquely difficult position of having to interpret not just legal precedents, but also the spiritual and moral implications of the competing claims. The Church of England had its own complex relationship with royal authority, and his decision would need to balance religious tradition with constitutional law and public sentiment. Princess Anne finally broke her silence as the sun began to rise over London. Her words carried the weight of decades of royal service and an uncompromising commitment to duty above personal interest. She acknowledged that Catherine's research was thorough and her legal arguments sound, but she questioned whether such dramatic change served the institution's long-term interests. The revelation that several Commonwealth nations had been quietly consulted about Catherine's potential claim added another layer of complexity to the crisis. Catherine's team had been working behind the scenes to ensure that her move would not destabilize international relationships, demonstrating a level of strategic thinking that impressed even her harshest critics. As morning light streamed through the conference room windows, it became clear that Catherine had fundamentally altered the royal landscape. Regardless of the ultimate outcome, her bold challenge to established authority had exposed deep fractures within the royal family and raised questions about the monarchy's ability to adapt to changing times. Camilla made one final impassioned plea, appealing directly to King Charles as both her husband and the reigning monarch. She argued that Catherine's actions represented not just a challenge to her personal position, but an attack on the very concept of royal stability and continuity that had sustained the monarchy through centuries of change and crisis. Catherine responded with equal passion, but her appeal was directed toward the future rather than the past. She spoke of her children's inheritance and her duty to ensure that the monarchy they would inherit was strong, relevant, and capable of serving the British people effectively in the 21st century and beyond. The exhausted participants took a brief recess as dawn broke fully over London, but everyone understood that they were far from reaching a resolution. The constitutional crisis that Catherine had triggered would require days or even weeks of negotiation, legal analysis, and political maneuvering to resolve. Media attention intensified as morning news programs began reporting on the unusual palace activity, though the full scope of the crisis remained hidden from public view. Palace press secretaries worked frantically to craft statements that would satisfy media curiosity without revealing the true extent of the constitutional emergency unfolding within the palace walls. The stakes continued to rise as it became clear that Catherine's challenge could not be easily dismissed or quietly resolved. She had created a situation that demanded a fundamental re-examination of royal authority, precedents, and the very nature of constitutional monarchy in modern Britain. The second phase of the crisis was beginning, and all parties understood that the decisions made in the coming hours would determine not just the immediate outcome of Catherine's challenge, but the future direction of the British monarchy for generations to come. The breaking news alert flashed across television screens throughout Britain at exactly 7:30 in the morning, sending shockwaves through a nation that had awakened expecting another ordinary day. The BBC's royal correspondent stood outside Buckingham Palace gates, her voice trembling with the magnitude of the story she was about to break to millions of viewers across the Commonwealth and beyond. Within minutes of the news breaking, the palace switchboard was overwhelmed with calls from journalists, politicians, and concerned citizens demanding answers about the unprecedented constitutional crisis. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from support for Catherine's bold move to outrage at what many perceived as an attack on royal tradition and stability. Catherine watched the media frenzy unfold from the palace's private apartments, her children safely at school and unaware that their mother had just triggered the most significant royal constitutional crisis in living memory. She felt the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders, understanding that her actions would be scrutinized and debated for generations to come. The Prime Minister received an emergency briefing at Downing Street as government constitutional experts scrambled to understand the implications of Catherine's claim. The political establishment found itself in uncharted territory, with no modern precedent to guide their response to a challenge that struck at the very heart of the constitutional monarchy that formed the foundation of British government. International reaction came swiftly as news of the crisis spread beyond British borders. Commonwealth nations expressed concern about the stability of the institution that served as their ceremonial head of state, while Republican movements in various countries seized upon the crisis as evidence that monarchy was an outdated and inherently unstable form of government. Camilla retreated to her private quarters, surrounded by a small group of loyal supporters who struggled to comprehend how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered by someone they had underestimated. The realization that Catherine had been planning this move for months, while maintaining the appearance of dutiful compliance, was perhaps the most shocking aspect of the entire affair. The legal battle intensified as teams of constitutional experts descended upon the palace, bringing with them centuries of legal precedents, historical documents, and scholarly opinions. The Royal Library became a battlefield of competing interpretations as lawyers, historians, and constitutional scholars fought to establish the validity of Catherine's extraordinary claim. King Charles faced the impossible task of mediating between his wife and his daughter-in-law while maintaining his own constitutional position as monarch. Every decision he made would be scrutinized for signs of favoritism, and the wrong choice could potentially destabilize his own relatively new reign. The stress of the situation was evident in his increasingly haggard appearance as the day progressed. Public opinion polls conducted throughout the day showed a nation divided along generational lines. Younger Britons overwhelmingly supported Catherine's challenge, viewing it as a necessary modernization of an outdated institution. Older citizens tended to favor traditional stability and expressed concern about the precedent Catherine's actions might set for future royal behavior. The Archbishop of Canterbury emerged from his consultations with a carefully worded statement that managed to satisfy neither side completely. While acknowledging the historical validity of Catherine's claims, he emphasized the importance of stability and continuity in royal institutions, effectively calling for a compromise that would preserve both women's dignity while resolving the constitutional crisis. Prince William found himself thrust into the center of the storm as media attention focused on his reaction to his wife's bold move. His public statements carefully balanced support for Catherine with respect for royal protocol, but those close to him reported that he was struggling with the personal and public dimensions of the crisis his wife had created. The financial markets reacted nervously to the constitutional uncertainty, with the pound dropping against major currencies as investors worried about political instability. The economic implications of the royal crisis added pressure for a swift resolution, as prolonged uncertainty could damage Britain's international standing and economic prospects. Catherine's strategy became clearer as the day progressed. She had not simply discovered an obscure legal loophole. She had crafted a comprehensive plan to modernize the monarchy and position herself as its guiding force for the 21st century. Her timing had been perfect, striking during a period of constitutional uncertainty that maximized her chances of success. Palace staff found themselves divided into competing camps as news of the crisis spread throughout the royal household. Some viewed Catherine's actions as a betrayal of royal protocol and tradition, while others saw her move as a necessary evolution of an institution that needed to adapt to survive in the modern world. The international media descended upon London like a swarm of locusts, transforming the normally staid atmosphere around Buckingham Palace into a circus of cameras, reporters, and royal watchers. Hotels throughout the capital filled with journalists from around the world, all seeking exclusive angles on the story that was reshaping perceptions of the British monarchy. Behind closed doors, frantic negotiations continued as both sides sought a resolution that would allow them to claim victory. Catherine's team insisted that her legal claims were unassailable and demanded recognition of her enhanced status, while Camilla's supporters fought for a face-saving compromise that would preserve the existing order. The revelation that Catherine had secured support from key figures in the House of Lords added another dimension to the crisis. These hereditary peers, many of whom traced their own titles back centuries, lent credibility to Catherine's interpretation of ancient royal law and put additional pressure on the palace to acknowledge her claims. Commonwealth leaders began making discreet inquiries about the crisis, concerned about its potential impact on their own constitutional arrangements. The Governor-General of Canada and the Governor-General of Australia were among those seeking reassurance that the British royal crisis would not destabilize their own governmental structures. As afternoon turned to evening, Catherine made her next strategic move by releasing a carefully crafted public statement explaining her actions in her own words. The statement, distributed through official palace channels, presented her challenge not as a power grab, but as a dutiful response to constitutional requirements that she was obligated to fulfill as Princess of Wales and mother of the future king. The public response to Catherine's statement was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Social media filled with messages of support from ordinary Britons who saw her actions as courageous and necessary. The hashtag #SupportCatherine began trending worldwide within hours, demonstrating the global impact of her bold move. Camilla's response came through traditional channels, with carefully worded statements from her representatives emphasizing her commitment to royal duty and constitutional stability. However, the contrast between Catherine's direct appeal to the public and Camilla's reliance on official protocols only seemed to reinforce perceptions that Catherine represented the future, while Camilla clung to the past. The crisis reached its climax as King Charles called for a final emergency session to resolve the constitutional deadlock. The exhausted participants gathered once again in the state conference room, understanding that the decisions made in the next few hours would determine the future structure of the British monarchy. In a dramatic turn of events, Catherine made one final revelation that stunned even her closest supporters. She announced that she was prepared to accept a compromise that would preserve Camilla's dignity while establishing new precedents for future royal succession. Her willingness to negotiate from a position of strength demonstrated the sophisticated political instincts that had guided her throughout the crisis. The final resolution came just as the sun set over London, with both women emerging from the negotiations with enhanced roles that reflected a fundamental restructuring of royal hierarchy. Catherine had achieved her primary objectives, while allowing Camilla to maintain face, creating a new constitutional framework that would guide the monarchy into the future. The announcement of the resolution was met with relief from palace staff, government officials, and the general public. Catherine had successfully modernized the monarchy while preserving its essential stability, demonstrating that even ancient institutions could adapt and evolve when guided by vision, courage, and strategic brilliance. As the dust settled on the most dramatic day in modern royal history, it became clear that Catherine had achieved something remarkable. She had not just claimed a crown. She had redefined what it meant to be royal in the 21st century, setting a new standard for royal leadership that would influence the monarchy for generations to come. The palace returned to its normal routines, but everyone understood that nothing would ever be the same. Catherine had proven that beneath her composed exterior lay the heart of a revolutionary, and the British monarchy would be forever changed by her courage to challenge the established order when duty and vision demanded action.